we're back, especially now out of our brand new studio. We felt it was time to bring the show back. The show is a very simple format. The first half of the show is we go through the topics of the week with an expert. That it could be an expert in general about esports or topics that are particularly interesting for our guests. But we will touch on all the big stories. And the second half of the podcast is really a deep dive into the esports story of our guest, in this case, Matt. I couldn't be happier to have you on, Matt. I think you're uniquely qualified to talk about a lot of the stories that we have going on today. But before we do so, I mean, we are in the Dignitas studio, the caffeine studio in the Dignitas headquarters. Can you talk a little bit about how this place got put together?
Yeah, so I've been here with Dignitas about 6 months. Came on to pretty much head up content and all the media stuff, which includes building out this awesome studio that we have here in Newark. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. This isn't the first time I built a studio, but I'd say to like this scale, this is one of the bigger projects I've worked on. And I mean, I'm super happy about it. It's awesome that we're doing shows in here, almost daily at this point. That's definitely our goal, is probably to get shows going on daily. We have an awesome production team. We have Patrick running the show right now, who does a lot of our live stuff. We also have Daryl, who's doing a lot of shooting and editing, and then Philip, who's working a lot more with like kind of the strategy and the administration side of things, which is great. So really excited about what we have here on the team, and we're looking to do a lot of cool stuff with Dignitas.
Yeah, we're really, really blessed to have such an amazing team working here. We're blessed to have you here as well. We'll dive a little bit deeper into your background story towards the end of the podcast. But let's dive deep into our first story right away. So first and foremost, I think the biggest story this week, one of the biggest stories, but definitely the most interesting story in my opinion, was that streaming network V.O.O.M, first of all, announced that they're a thing.
Right.
And two, raised over $70 million in a funding round led by Bitcraft.
How much did they raise?
$17 million.
17, right? I thought you said 70.
No, not 70. No, 17. So for those of you who don't know, VEN is a 24/7 TV network founded by esports producer Elio Horn and former Vivendi Games executive Ben Cusin, which has already received, as I said, $70 million in funding. Investors are very, very interesting. They include Bitcraft, which was founded by former ESL, by Jens Hilgers,
Jens, right?
Yeah. Blizzard co-founder Mike Morhaime, Riot Games co-founder Mark Merrill, Twitch co-founder Kevin Lin, and Blizzard's former head of global sports, Amy Morhaime. So for those of you who don't know what kind of the theory behind VEN is, so launching in 2020, VEN's a new, what they call post-cable network designed to unite a fragmented media marketplace and is aimed at core gaming, esports, and entertainment audiences, per the announcement. VEN has and will have live studios in New York and Los Angeles, maintaining a digital presence on streaming platforms, social networks, VOD, and 24/7 linear content. So you and I had a little conversation about this before we went live.
Right.
But talk us through, like, what are your thoughts on first of all, on this idea of a 24/7 gaming and esports channel? And two, what are your initial thoughts about VEN?
Sure. I mean, so I think it's interesting. Like, this is an idea that's actually been around for a long time, going back to Giga in Germany, and then also like in the US we had G4, and those were both like on television. Now we're seeing like this idea of like post cable, which is basically just another word for live streaming. But I think that when you see the word post cable, it means like it's got that organization behind it. It's not just somebody in their bedroom streaming, right? And this is obviously like very similar to Cheddar. Cheddar's been doing stuff with esports, with cryptocurrency, and doing it. I would say it's very much still in like kind of a TV style, in a talk show, CNN sort of style. But they obviously want to reach a different audience with the content that they do, and obviously the fact that it's online. I'm really interested in what VEN's going to do. I think that like the lineup of people working to put this together is like incredible. The list of names you just read, I mean, these are people who are major players in esports space for a long time. Ariel, actually, I did one broadcast for Riot when I was working at ESL. I was doing Riot stuff as we were like contracted by them, and I actually was doing a broadcast that Ariel was calling the shots on. And like, this guy's a super professional. Like, I had been doing a lot of esports broadcasts at that point, and I'd never heard, this guy's an Emmy winner. He comes from that TV background. So like, I'm really interested to see how they bring that knowledge and that understanding of both worlds, esports, gaming, and kind of like TV to this new post-cable network and what that's going to look like.
I think you hit on some very interesting points that I just want to dive a little deeper in. So first and foremost, you mentioned that it's interesting to see what they're going to do. And I think that's the most important thing. For listeners who don't know or who just started listening today, I actually have a background in a 24/7 esports channel as well called B.O.O.M. It was very much a startup. Funding was good, not nearly as good as that of then. And one of the challenges that we had originally was trying to convince an audience that isn't used to 24/7 to care about 24/7, right? Like, here's an audience that is basically raised on this idea of you get the content whenever you want, because 95% of gaming content is on YouTube.
Right.
So that's an audience who just wants stuff, watches stuff whenever they want, and even on Twitch, meaning like I know very few people who will be like, okay, my streamer is going live every day from like 8 p.m. to 12. Like, I'm watching that every time specifically. Like, they'll watch whenever they feel like watching.
Right.
And I think what's unique about a platform like Ven is they're kind of trying to push back on that, and they're saying, hey, we're going to create content that's going to get you excited. It's going to get you to watch our content at 6 p.m. every Wednesday, because
Right.
you want to. That's when you have to watch it. I think the real challenge is going to be, are they able to break that code? I think it's very tough to break that code, but if there's one group of people that can challenge that, it's some of the people that are on this list. It's Mark Merrill from Riot. I mean, he has done so much. It's obviously Kevin Lin who broke the code of media with Twitch.
Right.
And some of their someone like IRL who you mentioned. So, question I'm posing to you is, if you are building a platform like this, right? If you have to create a 24/7 channel for gaming and esports, what do you think are some of the pieces that you need to have in order for it to be successful?
I mean, I think that they have a huge opportunity here. And the opportunity is that, like, when I look at the streaming in the esports space, I feel like streaming is actually the one that's very untapped compared to esports. I feel like esports has been, we have the big stadium events. We've built out the leagues, the teams, there's investments, and there's so much going into esports. But really the reason that esports is so big is a lot of it has to do with live streaming. And live streaming is, to me, like an almost, probably even a bigger phenomenon, given that this is a completely new medium. It reaches people in a totally different way from previously. It's like the television versus the radio, but now it's like streaming versus TV. So we have all this interactivity, and we have all these opportunities to do things that I think that nobody in TV has ever tried because it didn't make sense in TV.
Yes.
So I think what'll be interesting to see is, like, how do they utilize, those innovations of live streaming? How do they utilize interactivity? And also, how do they take something that right now is just like done in somebody's bedroom and they play video games and turn it into something that still has that kind of authentic feel and that gamer-driven kind of focus, but is more produced. And I really think that if they're trying to push the boundaries of what's possible and not just remake TV online, but actually like explore and see what's possible with live streaming, I think that it could be a huge success.
And I think you hit such an interesting point there. This shouldn't be a TV style, post-cable channel that's dedicated to gaming. It should really be trying to challenge what that medium is as a whole.
Yeah.
And we have had conversations like this a lot, and it's like, how can we create content that's not only appealing to people, not only kind of satisfies what they want, but actually challenges. I mean, like, especially when you have a budget like they have, like, have interesting stuff, like have shows that are interactive and change based on what the audience wants, right? The real challenge is a platform like this, like live streaming, has to be only part of their business. Like, as they mentioned here before, like, it's about streaming platforms, social networks, VOD, and 24/7 linear content, right? So this has to be content that's interesting, not only to the person who is watching on Twitch or whatever live streaming, Caffeine, Mixer, whatever live streaming platform. It also has to be interesting for an audience that watches it on cable, because they're probably going to want to have those cable dollars, because there's still a lot of money coming in for cable. And people who are watching it on YouTube or another VOD platform like 2 days later.
Right, exactly.
And that's going to be really tough, right?
Yeah, because those are different worlds, right?
Exactly.
And I think one of the things that I'm very interested to see is, you know, how do they spend that money, right? Like what do they invest in? I know that Cheddar invested a lot in doing very traditional sort of setups. So, you know, obviously like in live streaming, there's a lot of technology now that makes it very easy for somebody to set up in their living room or in their bedroom and just go live. You don't need more than a webcam and a computer, basically. And that's one of the really, you know, for me as someone in that space, like the really cool thing is that 10 years ago, it was way harder to do everything than it is now. You can do things now with your iPad, with your iPhone, with like, it's so easy to go live and make content. And what was weird though was that, you know, at Cheddar, they had built out this infrastructure of, you know, very much like a TV broadcasting station. So they had large teams and they had all the best equipment and stuff. And, you know, even in this setup here in the studio, like we have like hardware and you know, more or less kind of professional stuff. But I think even that is, you know, for at this day and age to do content that's very much geared towards gamers and that internet audience, it's almost overkill. And I think that I really think the play for them is like creativity, right?
Yes.
So I feel like, you know, trying to get away from that kind of structured TV way of doing things and breaking the mold is going to be what's really important.
And an interesting fact, like 24/7 channels are not new to live streaming platforms.
No.
I think Caffeine has certain feeds that are 24/7. I know Twitch has a category called 24/7.
Right.
Or Always On is their name.
Yeah.
That's one of their least watched categories.
Right.
The only time when it's successful is when they have like, when Twitch pushes like a Pokemon marathon or like an anime series where they just create this cultural moment.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen.
Well, you say it's the least successful from a viewership standpoint, and that's because obviously people prefer to watch things live, and a lot of live channels are always going to get kind of that those viewership numbers. But I actually think that 24/7 channels are very successful on Twitch because what they allow you to do is take content that you've done live and then play it again for people to watch, right? Or just do Pokemon stuff. So, you know, like people want to watch a Pokemon marathon, you know, and if that's on Twitch 24/7, like you might have 3,000 viewers in there, right? But like, I don't know how much Twitch is paying for the rights for Pokemon or whatever, but it's just sort of an interesting experiment. And I could talk about this a little later, but actually, when I was at ESL, they started one of the very first 24/7 channels.
True.
And they were able to show, you know, classic CSGO broadcasts. And, you know, they might get 400 viewers or 1,000 viewers, or maybe after a big tournament, 2,000 people are watching the replay of the tournament. But I think that from an investment point of view, for them just to take that catalog and be able to have people watch old stuff, it's very much like a TV model, and it makes a lot of sense, you know.
Yeah, well, if you recreate that value for, you add value is probably a better word for ESL at that moment, right? It's great. Like if you can say, hey, this CSGO match got like 20,000 concurrents, but in the past 3 weeks after, we've added 5,000 people more to watch, you know, 5,000 concurrents more over like replays of that broadcast, right? That's great. That those are eyeballs, right? I think, but the real product for them is that initial broadcast, and this is added value. Right. So getting 3,000 people to watch it, or 500 people, or even 2 people to watch it, is incremental value.
True.
For something like Venn, the challenge will be they need to have 20,000 people watching that 24/7 at the very least, right? So it's not it's not a bonus, not the cherry on top anymore. It's their main core business. Yeah. And that'll be challenging.
It'll definitely be a challenge I would be very surprised if they come out of the gate with live programming that is truly live 24/7 and there's no live to tape or reruns. I think that almost would be impossible. Especially from a return on investment point of view. Like if you're doing a live show at 2 a.m, like, you know, unless it's, I guess, aimed at a Chinese market or something, it's not going to really do super well. So I assume that it's going to be live 24/7, but it's not going to be live content 24/7. You know what I mean?
Of course. And also, I would imagine just seeing their funding round, like they're not going to come out with TV budgets.
No.
They're going to be a lot more scrappy.
Right. Which is good.
Yeah, and by the way, like, we have our questions about 24/7. Like, there's one thing that kind of completely challenges my thought, and that's like, you think Kevin Lin doesn't have that question? Like, when he had that initial pitch deck from them, you think he wasn't thinking, like, he knows Twitch better than most of us
True.
do, right? You don't think he has any challenges? Of course, he challenged them, and they were probably able to give some really good and interesting responses to that. So I kind of want to put an end to this conversation for now. Okay. Just because we're going to talk a lot more about the TV world and the content world when we talk about your background. And there are a lot of other stories we need to go through. Yeah. So another story which has become a lot more relevant for both of us the past 2 months is League of Legends. Right. So for those of you who don't know, Clutch Gaming, our League of Legends team, we made it into Worlds. We're so excited. Worlds, baby. Yeah. I mean, our whole office is just so excited right now. Yeah. But League had their 10-year anniversary. Yeah. And with that, they announced that they hit a new high of 8 million peak concurrent players a day. So to put that into perspective, that according to Riot, that makes League the biggest PC game in the world, and it's even bigger than the top 10 games on Steam combined. Yeah, I saw that. That's insane if you think about it. I mean, that's insane. Yeah. That's insane. It shows me a few things. One, it shows to me just how powerful League is. Two, it shows to me how massive an Asian audience is, right? The audience in Asia, because we all know, like, particularly China and Korea are League's 2 biggest markets. Right. I don't think there are any official stats, but that's just like, that's common sense. Yeah. League is China's closely resembles China's traditional sport. Like, yeah. It's so massive, and I would imagine that a huge chunk of this, I don't know if that's 4 million, I don't know if that's 7 million, I don't know if that's 2 million, but I would imagine there's a big part of that audience that's from China and Korea. But yeah, this was a lot higher than I would have guessed. So question to you, as someone who's worked on one League broadcast. At least. Done a few, yeah. Okay, I just thought you said one. So what do you think about this number? And two, what does this say that they hit this number 10 years in? I mean, it's just super impressive, right? Like, it's crazy to see that. I mean, I remember when League came out. I mean, it was 10 years ago. That's basically when I was playing it, and I stopped playing it in like 2012 or something. And to think that, like, a game that I grew tired of, and not to say that I'm any sort of barometer or anything, but like that I was like, yeah, it's, I had kind of moved on, and to think that it's still going. I mean, that means that, how many of those players are playing 10 years ago, right? Probably not that many. This is a brand new set of players. These are people who are coming into this game, and it's a 5-year-old game. It's a 10-year-old game, when these players came in, and they love it. And it's still like, I mean, League definitely there's something about it that's just very, I don't want to say addictive because it's like a bad connotation, but like it definitely is. It's just really fun, right? And like people love the game, and it's a credit to Riot to keep it fresh, right? I remember thinking, like, even a long time ago, like, how are they gonna, there's already 100 champions or whatever. Like when there's making a new champion every 3 or 4 weeks, like there's gonna be 200 champions. It's gonna be difficult for new players to get into this and learn how all this works. But like credit to them, they've done like such a good job. Educating people how to get into the game, doing stuff with the broadcast. Obviously, LCS and LEC are like super strong. So, and they're doing stuff all over the world. I mean, I think that they got it right. Yes. They really got it right. And I think the esports part probably had a very big part to do with that. I think so too. I think and that's what I like to say a lot is like a good game gets people in, a good esports environment gets people to stay. Right. Like StarCraft still has. I mean, obviously not to the extent of the initial play, but still has a lot of people who are active just because they care about the whole environment, 360 environment. To that point as well, like Blake Robbins, who is a VC out of Detroit and one of the investors in 100 Thieves, or his fund is one of the investors in 100 Thieves, he had an interesting point where he says a League. I don't think he said if it's the only or one of the only games that he thinks can really become can have the same value as like a baseball, where like 40 years from now when they hit their 50 mark, there's still going to be people playing it. And one of the interesting theories that he had was it's a game where people graduate into. It's like you initially get into gaming by playing, I'm just going to use like a Fortnite.
Yeah.
Then you might start playing something like Halo, COD,
Right.
CS:GO, like something that like takes there's so much more maturity to the game.
Yeah.
And then you will get to that point where you become a real quote unquote gamer, and I don't mean to say if you play any of the other games you're not, obviously you are, but you become so invested in gaming, and then you look for what's the pinnacle of depth and strategy, and then you go into League of Legends.
Right.
I'm not downplaying any of the other games, more saying like it takes 100, 200 hours to even grasp the basics of League of Legends.
Right. It's not exactly a pick up and play, and you certainly don't have a lot of fun your first few games, I would say.
Yeah.
But it really speaks to competitive video games as a whole that games like that are RPGs or whatever, they come and go. And there's a lot of people who, their favorite game is Skyrim or their favorite game is Grand Theft Auto. Mm-hmm. But the games that people are playing for years and years and years after the first time they played it, you might go back and play, a run through GTA or something like in the future. But like to come back and play the same game every day for years, that only happens with competitive games. And League is like obviously one of the top competitive games. And so that's why you see that once people get into that, it's like a whole nother level from playing other video games. It's a level that keeps you hooked. It makes you want to get better. And that's why people keep coming back.
And I will always put my trust in a game that's able to be generationally, meaning like League now has passed 10 years. They've passed like quote unquote a generation, right?
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned, you started playing League when it first came out. It wasn't interesting for you anymore, right?
It was. I liked the game, but it made me rage.
I'm saying like for some reason, exactly. I'm very bad at League, so raging happens a lot. I have a plan to actually get back into League and play it a lot more, but I am not looking forward to some of the learning curve moments. But to the point what you're saying, it's like you played for a year or two or however long you played, and you're like, hey, like this is like for whatever reason, right now it's not too interesting for me at the moment. And then a new generation took over basically and is playing it right now. And I think that's really powerful because I think you best represent, if we take the traditional sports example, and obviously these are two completely different things, like esports and traditional sports, but you've wrestled in high school, right? So you wrestle for a few years, like 2-3 years, and you're like, I love wrestling, like it's a big part of who I am, but like I don't want to go into college and wrestle, and like, hey, like you might get the itch like a year or two from now. Hey, I want to do some wrestling. Like go to like an adult wrestling club and whatever. But there's a whole new generation that gets into it and kind of evolves the game with it. And I think that shows the staying power. Compared to Fortnite, which I love Fortnite, like I think Fortnite is very generationally, and I don't think the game is going to be appealing enough to people 3 years from now that keep on playing it, although I might be proven wrong with that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things about League, because like you can compare it to other competitive titles like that have been around a long time, like CS is the first one that comes to mind. But the interesting thing is that like, so when I talk to people who are younger, who are playing League, I always say like, what champion did you start playing at? Because that's sort of a good, nobody really remembers the date, but like you remember what champion came out generally. So like I started playing when York came out. When I tell that to people and they go, whoa. And I say I stopped playing when Kha'Zix came out, and they're like, oh wow. So like a lot of people I talk to, I think Khalil here, he started playing when Kha'Zix came out. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is that like the game was different. It was like, I think the time where I played it, and every time, maybe every year or every season, like the game changes significantly, right? They add new champions, mm-hmm. the meta changes, they change the map, they add different, drakes and all this stuff. And the game has been evolving constantly. So when I played it, it was a different game. I think CS is different in that way. I think CS has pretty much been the same since CS:GO came out, other than that they add a couple new weapons sometimes, which I don't think really changes too much. They tweak things. And the maps, they change the maps a little bit, right? They update them. But I feel like League has been evolving in a way that's like, every year it's almost a different game. It's the same game, but it's like if I came in and played it right now, I'd have no idea what was going on. Probably if I came in and played it a year after I stopped, I would have no idea what's going on until I had a few games under my belt.
So taking a step back a little bit from League and focusing on Riot. So one of the things that Riot did announce was they were going to have a broadcast like in a few weeks to kind of talk about some of the exciting things that are coming up.
Yeah.
Like, just a clarification, even though we work for Dignitas and our team is in the LCS, we have no idea what this is about, right? We can.
I do. No, I know exactly. No,
well, Matt always knows, but
we got to get Joker on again. He'll let us in.
He'll know, but he's part of the he's like working on a communications team right now, so he'll be talking when they have announced.
You can have him on, and you guys can talk about it.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, like there are a lot of rumors and just on Reddit of like, what is this announcement? And obviously it's going to be leak based, but a lot of people are saying, hey, this just feels like a Nintendo Direct. This feels like an hour-long broadcast where they're just going to dump a whole bunch of news. And one of the things that Riot confirmed was they're officially going to validate their name Riot Games, being plural, and they officially announced something that was kind of already known for a long time, and they're working on a fighting game title.
Right.
I don't know, maybe we're going to see some information there, but what do you think? Like, how can Riot use their strong IP and help grow from, being the father of the most successful game in the world to becoming a multi-game publisher?
I would say that like they should stick with the same formula with the new game, which is, I doubt they'll do this, but like it wouldn't make sense to start just pumping out games, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like what's really been successful for them, I mean, the first thing is that they have a game that people come back to, and they have a game that has staying power, and that they're able to like evolve it over 10 years with no other game coming out, and that's the second point, is that they know how to make money off of just keeping a single game fresh, right? And they sort of pioneered that idea of skins and all this stuff, and or they didn't pioneer it exactly, right? But they definitely capitalized on it. Yeah, exactly. So, I think that they'll probably do that again. I think that they've probably taken a lot of time in thinking about the game that they're going to create, and that once it comes out, it's probably going to be a very main focus for them alongside League. And I don't know if they're going to go into another game right away the next year or anything like that. I sort of doubt that's how it would work for them given how League has been. But what I'm really excited to see is like, is this going to be similar to Bungie, where they go in a completely different direction from Halo and they start on Destiny, which has a sort of similar feel, but it's a different universe, right? Because obviously League is a universe just like Halo. And I'm interested to see if they're going to depart from that.
It's interesting. Yeah, you kind of have Bungie versus Blizzard, right? Kind of like Blizzard obviously loves to take their lore and kind of put it into everything.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because it worked both ways. Like, I wasn't into WoW. I wasn't into Heroes of the Storm. I started playing Hearthstone. I really get into it, and now all of a sudden I'm interested in Blizzard lore because there's a lot of infusion of lore in Hearthstone. I would love to play a fighter with a fighting game with Kiana. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
I think that they probably will keep it in that realm. I mean, to be honest, like the reason that Bungie went from Halo to Destiny was because they didn't own the IP anymore. Microsoft owned it, and they created Destiny when they became an independent studio, right? So I feel like, it just makes sense that they're going to play off the success of League, off the people who love it. I'm interested to see, will a lot of League players be into fighting games, or are they looking for a completely new audience here? I know a lot of fighting game players, and I don't know many of them who are playing League outside of maybe like the guys in Smash, right? But I don't know if a lot of Street Fighter guys play.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard there's a lot of overlap between Smash and League. Really surprising. But people like Matt, who's part of our Dignitas family, he loves League, obviously. But really, really interesting follow, and we'll definitely, guys, like when that big, thank you, Patrick, when that big announcement comes out, or that big Nintendo Direct for League, we'll be talking about it for sure. Yeah. There was another big story in kind of when we're looking at the big titans of video game publishers. When we're looking at Activision Blizzard, there was an interesting story, and it's actually two stories into one. So first and foremost, I want to focus on on Hector Rodriguez Hex,
Right.
right? So obviously, Hex left Optic Gaming,
Right.
and which was acquired by Immortals, and he joined NRG as their new co-CEO. Now that comes in with a second announcement, which is that NRG has secured the Chicago franchise spot for the Call of Duty Global League, which begins in 2020. And
Yep.
I don't know, this hasn't been officially confirmed, but people kind of understand that, like, obviously Hector is going to focus on that, right? So, in very interesting approach. I don't want to focus too much on Hector and that story. I kind of want to lead that into kind of a general conversation about the Call of Duty World League.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot more interesting for our audience, that moves away from to really the business part of it.
Right.
So just really quickly to summarize it is that the Call of Duty World League is very similar to Overwatch League, where they take where Blizzard has taken a franchise they've worked on for the past, or Activision Blizzard, and now they're franchising it. Overwatch League, obviously, it's about to enter their third year coming up, and teams are moving into their home markets.
Right.
With the Call of Duty League, it's going to be a little different. It is going to be home markets, but it's more going to be event-based and like week in, week out.
Right.
Franchises who are confirmed is Atlanta Esports Ventures has Atlanta, Envy has Dallas, Sterling VC that owns New York Excelsior, now owns New York Call of Duty as well.
Mm-hmm.
Contract Gaming owns Paris. I believe they own the Paris Overwatch team as well. Overactive Media, which owns Splice, now owns Toronto. Wise Ventures, which is a new entrant into esports, owns Minnesota. Misfits Gaming has Florida. And Kronkis Sports and Entertainment and Immortals both have Los Angeles. And then recently they announced London, Seattle. Seattle is with Luminosity. London is with Rogue, and Chicago now is with NRG. So
Right.
that's a whole bunch of information.
That's a lot.
That's
yeah.
a lot, right? Those are, first of all, a lot of teams with history in esports.
Right.
So, if we take a step back, you have worked on Call of Duty before. You've worked on one Call of Duty event or more?
There was one stream. It wasn't even an event, actually. It was just the grand finals of 2010 Call of Duty World Championship. Yeah.
Well, obviously you have experience as a fan and working in that broader sphere. Obviously, you worked at MLG, and that's
Right.
the most known name on the production side of Call of Duty. So, what is your thoughts? Like, what are your thoughts on taking a league which is historically grassroots,
Yeah.
and putting it into a franchise model?
That's exactly. You put the hammer right on the nail there, which is that, I always see stuff like console games, for example, right? They grew from very much a grassroots place, right? I would say PC games did as well, but PC games very much depended on that. I think you had a little bit more organization, just because, like, you can't lug a computer around in 2003, so they would have setups, and they were a little bit more advanced with having the tournaments and stuff. But I feel like COD and Halo especially, these really grew out of people just kind of like showing up at MLG events or at their friend's house or whatever it was, and that's how it got big, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always a little bit not like doubtful, but like worried that will be not a part of it going forward, with franchising, with money and big business and
Mm-hmm.
stuff, is that they're going to kind of lose what made this big in the first place, which is that you and your buddy can go to the event and play, right? So obviously, a franchise league, it's going to be just the teams who are the pros, and it's very much focused on you're a pro, and everybody else. I'm sure they'll have a system where you can become a pro, but this idea that people would go and sit in the seat and that's their whole weekend to watch Call of Duty, which is the same with Overwatch and a lot of these other games. I feel like it's sort of the wrong direction. I think the right direction is to open it up more. Like, I think it's great to have pro events, but I feel like the community like is really what drives this stuff. And if you shut it down and make it just like a closed off, these are the pros and you guys are the fans, like, you're sort of like losing part of it, which is what people want to go pro, right?
I agree. I agree to a certain extent. Like,
Okay.
I agree that it's incredibly tough to keep both groups happy, right? Because obviously, like, grassroots is beautiful from a engagement perspective, and if I'm Activision Blizzard, I love the fact that there's grassroots involvement, because those are people like with League of Legends that are going to play the game 10 years from now as well.
Right.
I think on the other hand, like a grassroots league is very tough to monetize. Like you can't really create sustainability for teams that are part of it, and teams feel talent. It's tough to create value and to sell like sponsorship packages if it's all grassroots. I think MLG has done an amazing job, but I think both these forces are kind of working against each other. Now, what I hope is happening is, so I know some of the public information that has been released is like, from year one, these teams are going to be working out of their home markets. So they're not going to go into the Call of Duty. They're not going to go into the Blizzard studio and be broadcasting out of that. They might do some stuff there, but not every week. Teams really get the opportunity to bring these events home. What I really hope is, what I would love to see is, New York is doing their New York Call of Duty event, and they have an amateur part of it as well, right? So that you both have that professional, like, when you see top Call of Duty players play, but you also have the opportunity, like, it's also a LAN party.
Right.
I would love to see that. I think some of these franchises are better prepared to do so. I mean, I see Envy and I think Astro. I think a legend in Call of Duty. Like, you were talking about the event that you worked on, Astro was casting.
Yeah, Astro and Fwiz were the casters.
Both the legends
Things have
of their
changed.
own right. Yeah, exactly. So it's really interesting. But then I see a Vice Ventures out in Minnesota, and I think, first of all, Minnesota, that's probably interesting. That's an interesting market. I don't know what the Call of Duty scene is there, but also, are they just going to look at, because Wise, I believe, is from the Will family who owns the Timberwolves, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, it's going to be, they're probably going to look at traditional sports and kind of try to combine that with esports. Yeah. But then I see someone like Envy, and I see Rogue, and I see Luminosity, and I'm like, these people probably know a little better, right? Especially Envy. Like, they're probably going to put on these awesome events. Yeah. Dallas Overwatch apparently was a really awesome homecoming. So, yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. That's the right word, I think. Cautiously, the right term. Cautiously optimistic, right? Yeah. The other thing that, it worries me, like, okay, first of all, are they going to make all the teams change their brands again?
They will. Okay. I'm pretty sure that's, I don't know for 100% for sure, but I assume so.
Okay. I understand why they do that, but I also feel like it's almost like a forced disassociation from the old ways, Yeah. That's kind of how I see it.
I completely agree. I will, for the audience, I will explain why this is the case, right? I will explain for the audience. A big reason is, it's both from a partnership and from a franchising perspective. If you're the Call of Duty League, right, and if you're trying to sell the official PC partner for all the teams, right, for the whole league, which some categories are league protected, you can't do that if Envy has, Legion, Lenovo Legion, and then, Luminosity has iBuyPower. Right. But by creating a separate brand, you can do that, right? So, secondly, also, I think what's really important for them is the ability for partners to, Envy has the Dallas Fuel out in Dallas. They happen to have the Dallas location as well. So, but then you look at someone like Luminosity, or who has, I think, Vancouver, or has a Canadian spot in the Overwatch League, or the company that they work with has a Canadian spot in the Overwatch League, and then they have Seattle, right? Like, that way they can have separate brands cater to a local audience. Right.
That makes sense, yeah.
It's really, from a partnership perspective, it's kind of something you have to do in order to do this city-based league. But it remains to be seen how successful it is. Looking kind of at the franchise leagues, looking at Overwatch League, it's Season 2 right now. What are your thoughts on the state of Overwatch from a league perspective?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll keep it PG. Actually, no, I'm just kidding. I mean, I think Overwatch League was very ambitious. I'm not sure that it made a lot of sense to take a game that was so new and go so hard with it so quickly, right? Because if you look at a game like League of Legends, it took a long time for them to build up what that was, and maybe not a long time, but certainly it wasn't the plan when they released the game that like this will be a global esport and we're gonna have franchises and like all these, so it almost feels like, well, just plainly, like to say it wasn't very organic, right? So I'm always gonna preach about like how I feel like things that arise organically are always gonna ultimately do better in a scene that is 100% driven by the community. Esports is a community thing, right? So when I see projects that are started by the community, that gets me excited. When I see a project that's like started by a business in order to make money, and that all the decisions they make are, it might be the right decision to have the franchises and take all the fees and do all this, but ultimately, like, they're a business, they want to make money, right? So I feel like it's not a bad thing to have partnerships, or not partnerships, franchises. Yeah. I think it's good for esports because it's going to help keep everything sustainable. I just don't know if Overwatch was like the right game to do it with. I don't know if it had like the staying power to start, and I think a lot of people invested in it, hoping that it would be, like a huge success, and it's not exactly been a huge success. So
yeah. I think you hit on some interesting points, and I agree with you on a lot of it. I agree on the fact that like Overwatch was a 2-year-old game, I think, maybe not even 2 years when the league started, and it is not some. If we compare Overwatch and Call of Duty, I'm more optimistic about Call of Duty because Call of Duty is one of those games that is a really old franchise, and the promise of a franchise league is not that you and I are going to go there. I'm going to go to the Call of Duty event in New York because I love esports, and I think it's going to be really awesome. Yeah. The real promise is, John, who is, who hasn't really played Call of Duty, but like is a New York sports fan, is going to go because he has played Call of Duty when he was a kid. He's like, oh, this is awesome. We have a New York team right now, right? Yeah. Call of Duty is much better in a position to do so because of the massive casual fan base, and the fact that it's really new and it has a big cultural foothold. Right. There are a lot of famous artists and rappers and athletes.
There's a lot of famous Call of Duty players.
Exactly, that same way as well.
One, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Looking at Overwatch is really like you have that hardcore audience, right? It's much more like StarCraft, right? Where like you have a core audience that really, really loves the game, and it's not that like mainstream. It's like I don't know. There are 5 million players, and like 1 million of those really love the esport. Where like with Call of Duty, you might have 30 million people who play it, and you have 1 million people who really love the esport, right? So the potential is a lot larger. Yeah. So it will be interesting to see where it goes. I think what will be very interesting is to see how each market with the Overwatch League next year activates in their own market. Yeah. So I think you're going to have some markets like NV with the Dallas Fuel who are going to do an amazing job. Yeah. And then you're going to have some markets which I won't name, right, which they're up for a challenge, right? Because they don't have the experience. The market might not be as appealing. Yeah. So it remains to be seen. There are two more stories I want to touch on, and I want to make sure we have time to talk about you. So, yes. So first and foremost is TSM announced that they're starting their construction on a $13 million esports training center in Playa Vista. So the facility will be the largest esports training facility in North America when it opens, and we'll have studios, streaming rooms, gaming rooms, coach rooms, as well as a fitness studio and wellness center. Yeah. And according to TSM, it'll make it the first esports training center to include both these aspects. So
to include the fitness
studio and a wellness center, which I don't know what a wellness center is per se, but
it's where the snacks are. I don't know.
Well, in that case, we have a wellness center. Yeah. But I think it's really interesting. I think we're seeing a trend towards bigger, humongous training centers. We don't really know I personally don't really know if our industry is there yet. I mean, this thing won't be ready till 2020, but $30 million is a lot for a training center. And obviously, I would imagine this is more than just a training center. This might have some type of public, there might be a store, there might be some storefronts here. Right. There might be some real estate attached to it. It might become a lot more than that, but it's really, really interesting. So I particularly think it's an interesting conversation to have with you, because obviously we are right here out of the Dignitas facility, right? Which is really has everything a gamer can need, but is not as ambitious. At least, it's not a $30 million training center, but it's something that both of us worked on, and we're very proud of.
I mean, it remains to be seen whether these investments will pay off. I always tend to err towards esports has always gotten by and not really had a lot of resources to work with traditionally, right? The teams, the organizers, and that was kind of a staple of esports for me growing up was we just kind of got to get it done. We don't have a huge team. We have kind of all right equipment or whatever, and we're doing something that nobody's done before. So now we're seeing a complete shift in that. Now we have a lot of money, and everybody is trying to figure out what do we do with it. And a lot of people are placing really big bets. I think that the right strategy, I feel like what we have here with the Dignitas facility makes a lot of sense, because we're trying to figure out like every other team here, in the space, what makes sense and what is going to drive value, and what also is going to, make a compelling story and a great place for people to come and game. Right. Yeah. So, with the facility, I feel like that's the only boxes you need to check. Obviously going for the big bling or making it cool. If you have the plans to back that up, it makes sense, right? If you're going to have a bunch of people come in and make content every day, you're going to have a lot of teams there. I think that's cool. I feel like it would be really sick if you had 5 teams in a facility. You have a room of content creators. You have a really large scale thing going on. It just kind of remains to be seen whether that's going to work out, I guess. But I feel like it could,
I think it's interesting that it's TSM as well, because TSM has a reputation of having a relatively small staff, given the size of their organization, really taking an approach where they own all these websites, right? Yeah. There's that's a business they're really putting focus on. They're putting a big focus on content creators, no matter where they live. And they never were the team to go out and just spend and just buy the best team possible. A lot of their players have been with their organization for a while and are relatively competitive salaries. Right. And they're really good, or they used to be really good at picking talent very early on. Yeah. So it's interesting for them to make this big bet. However, what I see when I read this is this is not just going to be TSM's center. This is not even just going to be a center where other esports teams will come in and rent out space. I would be surprised, as I mentioned before, if there is no storefront attached to it, if there is no real estate attached to it. The way I see this is TSM wants this to be a location the same way that the Pru Center here has all these stores attached to it. Becomes more than just another training center for TSM players.
And it attracts the players and the talent,
exactly,
right? So, if we are looking at whether it's esports or live streaming or just this kind of future phenomena of content, right? Obviously having a spot where people can come and make or come and play or whatever it is, is going to help you attract that talent, and is going to help you build up, that organization in a way that's positive. And I think it's smart to have. I think it's smart to have something like that, to be honest, because I feel like, as long as they're experimenting and they're hey, how can we use this space effectively? I feel like there's so much opportunity now to do so many things around streaming and YouTube and esports, and there's just endless possibilities. If they put that facility to use and are really able to get the most out of something like that, attract, great talent to come and be there and work out of there, it makes sense. It's just like Google or Facebook making really nice offices with like
Yeah.
people riding scooters around and stuff like that, right? Like that's ultimately what they're looking for, is like these creatives, these people who excel in certain areas and things like that, right? So it makes sense.
Yeah. It's really cool feedback. We'll talk a little bit more about the facility and some of what you've done in a few minutes. The last story I want to touch on, which is personally for me super exciting, is Hugs, our Super Smash Brothers player.
Yes.
This week we announced a partnership between him and New Belgium Brewing.
Right.
It combines both my loves, beer and video games. So
They're going to say beer and hugs.
I mean, I love Hugs. I guess 3 of my loves. So Hugs and New Belgium Brewing are teaming up to promote Voodoo Ranger, which is their premier brand, through social and live streams. Hugs will be streaming from New Belgium's main brewery in Fort Collins, Colorado. He actually already did that. That was yesterday.
Yeah.
Which was such an awesome stream.
Yeah.
And while he's there, which I think he's flying back today, he received a VIP tour of the brewery. He met with the brewery employees, the brewers. He played against them, and he talked to Esports. So Chris, our colleague, was out with Hugs over the past few days. He was living it up out in Fort Collins, and what might have been the most awesome partner experience I've yet to see.
Yeah.
But I think it's super cool that here we have Hugs, who really has built a brand around craft beer in particular.
Right.
He has his sub hub, his audience that loves beer, and he's known to be a craft beer fan.
Right.
And he's able to use that, and now he's able to work directly with a really big brand like New Belgium and do some really cool things. What's exciting for me is not only that shows where our world is going, that brands like New Belgium are willing to have these type of relationships. In the past, you might only have with a traditional sports athlete that is known to love a certain thing. But 2, also the fact that they're willing to do these unique experiences and that they actually add value to Hugs' fans because there is this national connection. And there's a lot of more things that these guys have planned. So just quickly wanted to hear, what do you think about it? Most importantly, from a content perspective, Hugs does a lot of content in here. How do you see his love for beer and kind of this partnership kind of go into some of the stuff that he's doing?
Yeah, well, first of all, like New Belgium is what an awesome partner to have, right? Like,
yes.
It's sick that they, immediately were like, hey, you got to come out here and we're going to give you the tour and do all this stuff with you. And it was super cool. They're shipping in beer all the time. Like, if I'm going to have a sponsor, like I think New Belgium would be probably pretty up there on my list.
They're really good.
Yeah, it's really good, right? And for Hugs, I mean, I think it's great. Like you and I both know that, like, he wants to expand from gaming and become more of like, a content creator, internet personality. And this kind of speaks to my earlier point about live streaming and versus esports, which is that I feel like there's so much opportunity, beyond live streaming, beyond gaming in live streaming. Like right now, if you go on any of the major streaming sites, you're going to see people playing video games.
Yes.
You're also going to see people doing some other stuff, and that's sort of new. And I look at that and I go, wow, there's so much opportunity there for somebody to be not the gamer, but the artist or the craft brew reviewer or the whatever you want to do, like the guy who rides bikes or runs or is all about fitness and things that people on YouTube have been doing for a long time. What channel you want to watch for X, Y, and Z. There's a guy for it or a girl for it.
I think one of the most interesting things is obviously, as you know, but our audience might not know, Twitch started as Justin TV, which was just a plain live streaming platform.
Right.
And you had a lot of these people that did original stuff and talked about original things.
Yeah.
It then moved into Twitch because the gaming part kind of took over. Nowadays, we're seeing the just chatting category,
right,
which is kind of a category that encompasses everything which isn't gaming or music. And that's becoming one of the most popular categories on Twitch.
Yeah.
Because you're seeing an audience, like Hugs really said something, and we had a video that released like yesterday or this morning where Hugs kind of talked about his life and some of the interesting things that he's doing. He was talking about how he used to be a public accountant, and he worked what he called a 9 to 9. So he worked like very long and late hours.
Yeah.
And then he would get home, and then he would stream for a few hours, and he would talk about like Melee, and he would play Melee, and he would talk about like specific strategic things. because he felt like streaming was really important because he wanted to leave his job as an accountant, and he needed to have some type of way to make up for that revenue loss. However, he saw at some point he got home very late, and he was like, I don't want to talk about Melee because it feels like work to me. It feels like I'm back. It feels like I'm analyzing stuff, which he's doing for work. Yeah. So he was like, I'm just going to open up a beer, and I'm just going to talk about life. I'm just going to have fun. I might play some games that I enjoy playing. And all of a sudden, he realized his viewers actually liked that. Yeah. They liked who he was. And he has really built up a brand that's about having fun. It's not necessarily about games or whatever or what games he plays. And to our earlier point, when I talk to, as influencers that aren't part of the Twitch world or the live streaming world, I tell them, you don't need to play video games to be successful on live streaming platforms. Right. You just need to do something fun that you enjoy doing and that your audience can relate with. Imagine Tom Brady, streaming on Caffeine, having a GoPro on his helmet and just streaming practice. Right. And just or streaming him playing some football. That's going to be really cool. I don't know if the format is that good, but it's going to be a cool experience that you can do. And I know one of the areas where you have worked with a lot over the past few months is IRL backpacks. Right. So talk a little bit about that experience and what you think, how we can utilize that in the future. Well, listen, first of all, I want to talk about Justin TV being so ahead of its time that they backtracked and said, it's very difficult for people to stream what they're doing and they don't have any ideas yet, but people playing video games, that's popular on YouTube. What if people did that live? And so you have this these guys were geniuses to create a live streaming platform. If you think about it, what an insanely good idea. It turns into a gaming thing. They intelligently focus on video games and building that up. And I think focus is super important for big companies that want to grow. Is what is your thing, right? And video games were their thing for 5-10 years, and now they've expanded, which I like to believe has been their plan the whole time, back to what are these other things that people can do live. Yes. And if you look at the world right now, it's interesting because a lot of things that used to be tiered are really sort of breaking down into more of just a spectrum, right? So esports is a great example of it, and one of the reasons I always champion the grassroots stuff is because when you look at sports, right, your example with Tom Brady with the GoPro is perfect. So Tom Brady right now, if he wants to be a top athlete in the top game and have people know his name, he has to be on a team and he has to be in a league and he has to be in this professional sphere. And below that, there's college, and below that, there's high school. And you're always going to fit into one of these, right? You can't skip. You don't go from high school to Tom Brady, right? You don't go to be the starting quarterback. And that's true in esports. But the thing is that we don't have these tiers that break it down. If you want to be a pro Call of Duty player, you work your way up a rank to the point where you're on the friends list of some of the best players in the world. Right, you're undeniable, and people know you, and they just sort of accept you into the team, and that's how it works. Right now, it's a little more complicated now. It's the same with broadcast, right? Broadcast was always the same thing. You had the tiers. You had people doing ham radio maybe or whatever amateur stuff. Then you have the networks, right? And that was sort of the two tiers. And now that's also broken down, right? Banks, the same thing. You used to have you have your local bank, and you have the bigger banks, and now people are getting into Bitcoin and how can I take control of my own stuff? So I see that all that structure is breaking down. Yeah. And what that means is just immense opportunity for everybody. So for a person like Hugs or somebody who wants to be a pro gamer, you don't necessarily have to fit into any of these molds or be a part of any of these tiers. You just have to do your own thing. And people are realizing that it's not really that people are watching video games and they're enjoying the video games. I mean, they are. But what they're really enjoying is the personality. They're enjoying the person talking, playing, and being your friend. And you can do that whether you're playing video games or you're drinking beer, talking about Reddit posts or whatever it is, right? And whatever your thing is, you can make that your thing right now on any of these live stream platforms. There's no barrier to entry. There's none. The barrier to entry is, a streaming laptop and a cheap USB mic. Right. And there's no limit to what you can do either. I mean, the IRL backpacks, right? You can get this IRL backpack. I mean, and honestly, you could do this on your phone too. I mean, it's not going to be as good a quality in the signal or whatever, but
but you can just walk around a city and like do whatever you want. And like, if you're entertaining, people are going to watch that. That didn't ever happen on TV, right?
No.
So that's been the main driver for why I think there's like so many, like as soon as I saw IRL backpacks, I was like my brain just started like spinning up with like, wow, there's so much crazy stuff you could do here.
One of my most eye-opening moments was when Andy Milonakis decided to, or when Raquel hit Andy Milonakis up. Raquel Lilly, one of our influencers, hit Andy Milonakis up on Twitter and was like, hey, I know you're coming to New York. Let's live stream together. Yeah. And they just had a live stream for 3 hours. They just walked through New York City, and it just ate. They did awesome stuff. And at some point, they see a random guy, one of the street rappers, walk up to them and just freestyle.
Right.
And they start throwing up certain words, and he raps, and it's a really cool organic experience. It's so much fun. And that clip like goes semi-viral. I think some people tweeted about it and got a lot of views. But to me, it was just like, these were literally two people who decided to stream together, and like the backpack really is not that expensive. You compare that, like if we would have to do that with the cable model, everything would have to be pre-planned, and you would have hundreds and thousands of dollars in production budget.
Yeah.
And that barrier's just completely been broken.
Yeah. It's totally different. And the funny thing is, like, a lot of that stuff's on YouTube, or like, people walking around and they cut together their vlog, Casey Neistat or whoever. But with live, you have like this totally different element, which is like that whatever's happening is unexpected, and that you're experiencing it as a viewer along with the person you're watching. So live creates this connection. You're connected with the chat. You guys are all talking about what's happening, or, that was a hilarious moment. We all laugh, and you can see that everybody else thinks it's funny too. And it creates like this, like honestly, like this connection between you and the other viewers and the person streaming that doesn't exist on YouTube. And like, to me, like that is the single most powerful change in entertainment, I think, in forever, to be honest.
It's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So for our last 10, 15 minutes, I just want to talk about you.
Okay.
So generally, the last part of our show, we just dive into the esports story of our guest. I know you have a really interesting story. You've been in esports for what, like 10 years now?
10 years, yeah.
So in the next few minutes, kind of walk us through the story. Like, how did you end up here at Dignitas? What was that story like?
Sure. So the very beginning was playing Halo in my friend's basement. Halo 2 was the game that got me into everything. Man, I love that game. I would come home during lunchtime in high school and play it at home. Once we brought an Xbox into our physics class when we had a substitute, and we had it back in like the experimental tables or whatever where you do all that stuff, and we had it in the cabinet. And we had one of the like monitors where we're supposed to input data. We had it plugged into the Xbox, and we were just playing. Yeah, like so Halo was always a big love of mine. Xbox, a huge passion, and it was a way for me to like hang out with my friends. Like that was what me and my friends had together. And interestingly, a lot of the people playing Halo were sort of the jocks at the school. The wrestling team, like in the locker room, we're always saying like, "You got out BR'd last night" or whatever. Like 1v1 me exactly, right? So one of the things that they started doing, the friends of mine would. They were really competitive. We were all really competitive. And they were looking at MLG events because they wanted to go and see who was really good. And I didn't know anything about it at the time. But I thought, hey, that sounds fun. Like, we'll go on a little road trip. Columbus, Ohio, 2008 was the first event I went to. We drove down. And I actually didn't compete, but I was like the media guy, funny enough. I had a media badge. I still have the 08 Metal, or no, it was Meadowlands was the first event. We drove all the way to New York. That's right. And we picked up a friend.
From Detroit, right?
From Detroit, right. So it was about a 10, 11-hour drive. And one of the teammates, we had played with him for years online. And this is like my esports story, why I love esports. Played with this guy for years online and had never met him. And we went to his house and picked him up to bring him to the event. And he was like, I don't know, like 17. So we like met his parents and all this stuff. And they were like, yeah, whatever. And we're like, cool. So his name was Srijay. He's like still a great friend of mine. All those guys are good friends. So we went to the event, and man, I loved it so much. Like, I didn't even play. I was just like, I did an interview with like Walshy and like all these top guys. Like, you could never do that these days. Like, I was just like, can I interview you? And he's like, yeah, sure. So we do all this stuff, and I'm really into it, and I want to come back because like these are where my friends are. But obviously the events are like over the country, so it costs money. So I'm like, hey, maybe I can get a job. So I applied to be a ref. I got denied in a very dramatic way by Adam Epicella. And that's a long story. I won't get into it, but basically I was very excited and that I thought I was going to get the job, and then I didn't. So I was really let down about that. But I persevered, which is my number one advice to anybody doing esports is like keep trying. And I ended up getting a job as a technical director, pressing the buttons on the stream for the B stream, which was Gears 2. And this was in 2009. So I did Gears 2 for the entire season. Worked with a lot of really cool people on that. They brought me back for the next year for the events, and I was working on Tekken 6, I think it was. And Tekken was like I was a Halo guy. I never got to work on the Halo stream actually, but Tekken really like opened my eyes up to how passionate people were about other games. So, I really knew everything about Halo, I thought, but when I saw like this Tekken community, man, like these guys were really nuts. Like these like fighting game guys are really into it. So, so I was really happy to be able to do that. And actually I met my wife, Kelly, at this one of these events, Dallas 2010. She was a photographer for Tekken, and I was in the production, and we talked a lot and got along and ended up getting married about 3 years later. Yeah. So
that's awesome.
We dated for a few years remote. She moved to Michigan, and the rest is history. And we've both been working in esports ever since. So after MLG, I took like a job at a publisher, and then I ended up at ESL in Germany in 2014, and I got to work on Counter-Strike. I produced some of their biggest events. I produced 2 majors in Cologne. I worked on ESL Pro League. That project was kind of like my baby. I got to lead all the creative stuff on it, production, all the shows I did kind of alone. Like we had like 10 screens and 3 computers, and I was pressing 100 buttons. And that was really fun. And then doing the events, like I got to go around the world and experience a lot of different cultures. I worked in Germany, so I lived in Germany for those 3 years and worked with a lot of people from around the world, which was cool. And then I really wanted to come back to the U.S.
Yeah.
So, and I really wanted to live in New York. We had visited New York, and I was like, I feel like this place
so
is
you hadn't lived
coming.
here yet?
No, I hadn't lived in New York, but
for
we had
MLG,
visited.
where did you work?
So I only worked at the events for MLG, but
Okay.
I did an internship, and so I had been in New York. I actually lived in Golden Boy's basement for like 3 months. Huh? In the Bronx, yeah. Elder Avenue stop.
Nice.
I still remember the address because.
Let's not say that here.
No, I won't. I think it's his parents still live there.
Exactly.
He was, yeah. So, and that was esports for me. Like, I'm in my friend's basement, like trying to make a career here. Like, so yeah, I mean, that was cool. I actually stayed with Puckett for a little while too. Puckett and Shibby were roommates. So yeah, I mean, those are cool experiences. Those are like esports makes you bond with people in a way that nothing else can, just because it's tough and everybody's passionate and putting in the work for it. So, so I was really fortunate to kind of build that career up with the tournament side. I moved to New York in 2016, at the end of 2016, to take a job with Mashable, where I did the first like kind of non-live productions. I started doing kind of documentary content, journalistic kind of stuff, which I really enjoyed. I got to tell the stories of esports from my perspective, the things that were really cool about it that most people didn't know. And then yeah, like, so I did a little bit of stuff with Cheddar when they were starting their network, very similar to what Ven's doing. And then, yeah, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to work on a team. I had talked to Heather, who's the VP of marketing here. We worked together on a lot of CS events. And I thought it would just be so cool to have access to a team, work with influencers, and all the stuff that Dig's got going on are things that I think are, right up my alley, things that I really want to work on and pursue. And I feel like, it's a great place to be. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what's a day like for you?
Here?
Yeah.
Pretty scattered at the moment. I work on a lot of different stuff. So, I mean, there's everything from like, I got to run the studio. I have my team that I meet with pretty frequently. We come up with what content we're going to do for the week. We make sure we have all our ducks in order in terms of videos, in terms of streams. So it's a lot more, like from my side, a lot more managerial than the past. I've managed people in the past, but generally I'm usually sort of just leading the productions. Here I'm more like kind of leading the entire team and the effort for the content stuff. So, I'd say that like we're doing a lot of trial and error, which I think is important for figuring out, especially, we can't just follow what every other team does. We need to figure out like, what is our audience like? And, some of the cool stuff we've done, I think, has been being able to work with celebrities. Can we talk about this one here?
That you were editing?
Oh yeah, exactly. So
we can talk about it because the tweet went live.
Right, that's right. So we had Nick Carter here in the facility from Backstreet Boys, and he was playing CS:GO with Rain, and stuff like that. I also got to meet some other celebrities and do some content with them. Yeah. and just in general, like there's a lot of cool stuff and a lot of cool opportunities here. So basically like my day is trying to figure out like how to make the most of that.
That's really awesome. And you mentioned perseverance as the most important thing for people kind of trying to make it in esports in general.
Yeah.
Can you give like what is like number 2 and number 3 for you? Like what are the other important parts?
So I'd say like it's all about connections in esports. Like it's probably true in a lot of the world, but like the thing is that the esports community there's something about people in esports that sets them apart. And what it is that at least in the earlier days, a lot of them took a leap of faith and went to do something that their parents didn't really know what that was all about, and they probably had to go move somewhere weird. Like, so for example, when I worked at ESL, like I worked with Uber, who's Mitch. He's a Overwatch caster now. He moved from Australia, and he was actually an aerospace engineering student. He graduated with an aerospace engineering degree. Gives it all up to do esports. I actually have a similar story. I was in engineering school also, and then people from just all over the world like come and they have taken this sort of crazy leap to get into this thing that now it's established, now it makes sense, but back in the day everybody was just doing it because they loved it. So that's easily recognizable among those people, and a lot of those people are kind of the senior veterans of the industry now, and that's what they look for. They look for people who are so passionate about this, that they would go to the ends of the earth to try to work in it or whatever. And so when I say like network, it's like basically like connecting with these people and so that they can see that you have that same kind of like glimmer in your eye that they did. And I think that's like what's really important.
I think that's very interesting because one of the kind of themes that I've seen in the past few weeks, and our CEO hammered on it as well, is like, it's a privilege that we're working in esports, right? Like you said, there are people willing to give up aerospace engineering careers. Not now, not the way Uber is right now, right? The top caster for Overwatch.
This was for him to move and work on, like I think the first streams he did were Battlefield 4.
Yeah.
Right. Like these were not huge esports.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just so he can get his foot in the door.
Exactly. Yeah.
And obviously our industry has changed a little bit where now you don't need to take a step as big as that. I mean, I'm sure Australia has some opportunities locally now that they didn't have in the past. Regardless, like what makes esports so successful is the fact that we have some of the smartest people in any industry that are willing to move out of those industries because they're passionate about esports. Right. And like you said, there's a certain glimmer in your eyes. Like there's a certain, you have to wake up every day and be like, today is really, really hard because there's a lot of stuff I need to do, but like I'd rather be doing that than being somewhere completely different and work on an easy 9 to 5.
Esports is for people who want to create something new, basically. Like all the biggest players in the industry, I'd say like kind of outside the publishers, because the publishers make games. So,
of course.
So esports for them is actually a lot different, I think, the way that they view it. But like I worked with the organizers, and the organizers, the organizers, I think back to like Sundance from MLG and Puckett and Adam and even the ESL guys. They they all started it when there was no money, and like they just wanted to do it. They're like, I want to hold tournaments. Yeah. Like, let's do it. And they paid out of their pocket. And they hired people who were like, yeah, I think I can make the stream for this. And like where did they go to school for streaming?
Yeah,
there was nobody knows how to stream. Like, you just got to learn it. So there's a lot of people they want to do something different. There is no rule book and there's no instruction manual. So it's all about like, intuition. It's all about figuring things out. And a lot of people have spent their whole career in esports basically just trying to figure things out. And that's what I think is like, the personality trait of esports is like, let's figure out how to do this. It's not going to be easy. We don't have, for a long time, we didn't have the money. We don't have the support. We don't know if it's going to work, but we're going to try.
I know it's a cliche, but like, like people are saying like, oh, we're flying and the plane hasn't been built yet. Right?
Yeah.
So like,
oh, boy, is that true.
So
some of these events you guys watch, like, you have no idea how last minute, like they always come off professional, but they're difficult.
So before we end the stream, the last thing, two things. One is tell me tell me about the last thing you said. Like, you don't know what's going on behind the scene. Tell me an interesting story of when that happened, when something was outside on the broadcast and people were like, oh, everything is going well, and meanwhile you had to improvise. And the last thing is, where can people follow you?
Yeah, boy, which story do I go with?
Just pick one. You'll come back another time and we can
All
hear
right.
a lot more.
Okay, so the number one, definitely the number one was, so we did an event in Dubai, which was really great. And it was in September, which is not the coolest month. And Dubai is a bit of a warm place. So we did an event, and not the worst thing that happened in the event though, but they had the teams basically playing outside. So we did an event in September in Dubai outside. It was a CSGO. It was the ESL Pro League Invitational. So a little bit weird, and we had to throw this together, and we were working with like the local like Dubai Esports club or something like that, which is cool because again, like more people we get to meet, and it's like cool to be there and do that. But what really went wrong was that we were supposed to take delivery of 40 to 50 computers 2 days before the event, right? Makes sense, normal. So we arrive and no computers, right? The night before the event, finally a truck arrives, and we've all been waiting, right? We got word that this truck's coming with the computers. We open the truck, and yeah, sure enough, there's the parts for computers, but there's no computers. There's just parts. Mm-hmm. So we had 40 hard drives, 40 processors, cases, like everything that you would get if you went to Micro Center and you were building a computer and put that in your cart. This will come in the back of this truck, and nobody knew. Not a single person knew that they were going to bring all this stuff unbuilt. And I guess I don't know what happened, right? I have no idea. So we created an assembly line basically like 9 p.m. at night before this event starts in the morning. And we were just building computers, like all the staff, the referees, the production guys, any sort of like sales guys were there, like building stuff. And for some reason we were in the dark. I don't remember why, but we had like these fog lamps set up. And I still have like videos and pictures on my phone actually, because it was like one of the craziest things ever. So we did that. We built all these computers, and the tournament, it went off without a hitch. But nobody would have known that the night before we were all like, we're pretty screwed here.
Yeah, if you had to go and fix it all last minute. So
yeah, one more thing too, actually. So we did an event in New York, and when we got here, we had computers, but we didn't have the right power converters or whatever for the U.S. because everything was German. So we went to B&H, and we had to load up this guy's Uber with like 60 like power transformers that weighed like 10 pounds each, and this guy's like Uber was almost dragging on the ground. Yeah. Stuff like that. But you got to be adaptable. That's a big thing in esports too. You got to be flexible. You got to be willing to figure out how it's going to work even when the plan didn't work out. So
awesome. So just to end, where can people follow you?
So you can follow me on Twitter, Matt A. Kline, Kline. I don't tweet too much, but I'm actually trying to get a lot more into tweeting. I really like to talk about live streaming, innovation, tech, people who are doing innovative live stream stuff. That's really what I want to kind of focus my Twitter a little bit more on. So go ahead and follow me there. And yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on the podcast. Thank you to everyone who's listening. It's the official return of Esports B.O.O.M. We have a lot more coming up in the future. So thank you for listening.